So today's music spreading of ideas, music creation, music invention is about spectral gating or spectral filtration. It's a really cool technique, and spectral editing and things like that is a new norm. And what it does is it makes either very subtle effects to the audio or it makes very drastic effects. And so with spectral processing, you can get into frequencies, time durations, and like amplitude and manipulate what's going on in that spectrum and create a new shape from those parameters. So that's why when you hear this off effect or this gated effect or this kind of muted effect, that's occurring from a drastic pull of the spectrum. And so you can hear it used in production very subtly. And it's kind of like where dub took over production. And dub is interesting because dub blends things that don't necessarily blend together. That's the point of the dub. But it's so much more far-reaching than people have really used it for. And spectral processing is one of those examples. So through spectral processing, you could take a basic drums loop or sample, but basically the loop, you're adding a subtle spectral modulation as time goes on. And what that creates is an organic quality. So the spectral processing is key to making something truly organic. This phrase organic is really funny, but what that means is you're taking something that's static, like if you have like an 808, boom, pop, boom, pop, boom, pop, boom, bap. What you do is if you take a spectral processor and then modulate what's going on with those kicks and snares and hi-hats, then you have something that's not as drastic as a filter, but something that's effective to fooling the ear into thinking, am I hearing a real live drummer? So then you say, well, wait a minute, I'm hearing a live drummer, but it's on an electronic drum kit. So that's the magic of what the heck is going on with the spectral processing. You say, oh, you can take something like a guitar riff and use a spectral processor on the guitar riff, and it's like mind-blowing to think that you could very subtly modulate what's happening with the guitar riff. And guitar riffs can already be very complex because of all the stuff going on. I mean, just insanely complex. But if you add another dimensionality, because dimensionality is what we're talking about, and it just takes it to the whole new spectrum, if you will. So if you talk about spectral stuff, what you're really talking about is being a gatekeeper versus being a key master. And the spectral processing is like the key master. And the phrases are kind of inverted mentally, but really you're opening up a key into music to access this musical ether to really get more organic, but also interesting accents and interesting anomalies. If you hear a subtle reverb overflow on the sound, well, with spectral processing, you could take little pieces of that and mutate it, and then you have something even more interesting based on a subtle, like reverb sound. But it's not just happening with compression where you're just raising the volume, or with filtration where you're just raising just the frequency, or even combining the both. Because the spectral processing is shaping another anomaly that's happening. It's taking like an impression or a fingerprint of that little tiny bit of the spectrum, and it's saying, I'm going to play with just that, or I'm going to modulate just that. So then you can balloon that, and you have something that's interesting. Maybe cut that little portion out. That becomes its own element. So the spectral stuff goes on indefinitely, and that's kind of the point. And one more point about spectral processing is you could have a processing system where this part takes out kick with a little bit of the bleed from some other instruments such as bass. But this part of the spectral processor is taking out, like a piano. And so then when you have a sequencing of spectral dynamic processing and spectral filtration, then you can have like an automated a process of production to where you're pulling these unique sounds, boom, 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 and it's doing it like in a very complicated, convoluted way, so that you don't have to necessarily do that yourself surgically, and instead you have the algorithms of the processor that's doing a lot of that work for you to extract and separate and then play with the bleed between those elements. So, I mean, if you just think about the amount of either subtle or drastic manipulation and modulation that can occur, and the point of using the word modulation is it makes things more interesting than they are. So if you just play like that straight electronic drum pattern, that's very boring. But when you add subtle amounts of that modulation, and in the past they would use reverb and real modulation effects like chorus and phasers and things like that in subtle ways to make that straight pattern sound more complicated, more interesting, and that's a way to sweeten it, let's say. So what we're talking about is a spectral-based sweetening, which could be even more subtle or more drastic. So spectral dynamic gating, and what I'm now calling, parasonics or para-percussion. Para-percussion is one of the things I just created because it pulls large amounts of percussion, but it also pulls some additional elements, the non-percussion. So you're using these very small elements and then saying that's also percussion, but really it isn't. But like the attack on a piano or the thump of a kick that resonated with a bass, let's say. So then you pull the bass out as well as the kick, and you have a super kick. Because they use these techniques like in hip hop a lot, right? And so just imagine what's possible there with this spectral gating. And you can really see a new world of possibilities extended from using the spectral processing and spectral filtration to modulate and create more interesting sonic material just from anything, really. And mutating and all of that good stuff is really something. Spectral gating.